Hey guys, Frank here with Tithely, coming to you live with another episode of Modern Church Leader. Super excited about today's guest. As always, I'm pretty excited to talk to everyone we have on the show. But today's going to be a ton of fun. I'm going to be joined by Dr. Warren Bird, and I've got notes on this one because Dr. Bird has done amazing things in his life. So he's the VP of Research for EFCA.org. He's authored or co-authored 33 books. He's been the research director at Leadership Network, a seminary professor, a church pastor, planted churches, and leads a bunch of research projects at EFCA. So without further ado, let me pop in Dr. Warren Bird. Hey, how's it going, Warren?
Hey, great. I look forward to chatting together. I've listened to many of your broadcasts and learned much from you and your guest.
Oh, love it. Love it. Yeah, we, on the show, it's fun. Most of the conversations are with people who kind of are in current ministry, serving at a church in some capacity. And we kicked this show up at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's been fun just to talk to church leaders about what's going on in the trenches and how they're dealing with these things. And as the pandemic has got more normal, I guess, and we're just kind of living through it versus it being a big thing in March and all that. We've branched out and talking about different things, but it's super fun talking to folks like yourself and who are passionate about the church and serving and doing it in all kinds of different ways. So, really excited to have you on. Why don't you, just for the audience, tell folks, what you do today and kind of a little bit about your journey to this destination at EFCA.
Boy, how long do you have? But the nickel, well, God does a wonderful work in each person, and we can look back and say, oh, I see how this fit together, and he knew what was going on and how it all was going to weave together.
Yes.
But the gist is, at the moment, I am the Vice President of Research and Development for the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. Okay. And what that means is this is a group of a bunch of churches and Christ-centered nonprofits that have said, we're going to do integrity well. We're going to be above reproach. We're going to make sure Jesus doesn't get a black eye, and that the focus is on Jesus's mission in whatever he's called each of our organizations to do. And so there's a list of 7 things that people agree to become an ECFA member, okay. Churches and individuals. And my part is they want to know best practices. Like, okay, ECFA says we should have a board and a board that's at least 5 people, and that the majority are not family members or employees, so that for salaries and stuff like that, you can be unbiased. Right. Well, what does a really good board look like? What are best practices? How does my board get better? So that was one of many research projects that we've done.
Yeah. How long has ECFA been in existence?
41 years.
41 years. And do you, how long have you been at the organization?
I've been there 2 years. Now, it started 40 years ago when basically there was a scandal, and a bunch of senators said to Billy Graham and a bunch of other people, look, either you guys police yourselves or we will.
Okay.
And that's how it all got started. I moved here from Leadership Network, where I was their research director, and for 13 years. And before that, a pastor for many years and seminary professor at the same time. And all along the way, I've had the privilege of authoring or co-authoring books, 33 to date.
33 is a lot of books. Okay. That's an amazing feat all by itself.
Well, it's back to the spiritual journey. I could say each one of those was something that God wanted me to learn and grow in personally. Through that book. The latest is Better Together on How to Do Church Mergers Well, expanded and updated edition, which sadly, with the pandemic, it's kind of like with the medical condition, those who, encounter the virus with a pre-existing condition or are more vulnerable.
Right.
Likewise, those churches going into the pandemic that were financially vulnerable, on the line and all. Sadly, many of them, as the pandemic lifts, are going to say, We don't want to close our doors. What are other alternatives
Right.
where all the good stuff that's happened in our heritage can have a fresh start? And merging, healthy merging, is another option.
I mean, that's a whole nother show to talk about church mergers, because I find it fascinating in general. But let's we'll leave that one there, because I feel like we could talk for a long time. So in your current role, I mean, I even have questions about going from ministry into these kind of, this kind of job and things like that. But in your role, you guys just released a new report, and that's kind of what kicked off doing this show. So optimism, yet again, financial hope grows despite the pandemic. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the report, why you did it, and kind of the purpose behind it?
So as the pandemic hit, we thought, let's kind of track how churches and Christ-centered nonprofits are weathering the pandemic. And so every 3 months, let's ask sort of the same questions, and we can see what the impact is as time goes on. And one cluster of the questions in the survey is, what's your outlook towards finances to your ministry or church in the next 3 months? 3 options. Are you optimistic? Are you uncertain? Or are you pessimistic?
Right.
And interestingly, we had entered 2020. Do you remember back in January 2020? It seems like years ago.
Yeah.
But we had done a survey, in essence, saying, hey, how did 2019 end for you?
Right.
And, how are you feeling about what God may do through your finances in 2020? And in January, everybody said, wow, we had a much better year in 2019. So we kind of titled that report, we threw the word optimism in. And then when the pandemic hit, we asked the optimism question, the first round of the survey. And we were really surprised at how many more people said optimistic than uncertain. And I had predicted that in asking the question, early on in the pandemic, that more people would say, I don't know, I'm uncertain. I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
But optimism had. So then 3 months later, which would have been last month, we asked the question again, got 1,500 plus responses, and optimism was a little bit higher. Now, we broke it down by, like schools, educational seminaries and universities and all, they had a low end of optimism, and stuff like prison ministry and homeless ministry were doing much better, and we're much more optimistic. So we charted it out and sliced and diced, and that's what we found. That was one of the questions. There were actually several questions that we asked, and with some interesting findings. And see, we all want to know kind of like, is what I'm experiencing typical of churches or ministries that are about my size or about my, whatever circumstance, to say, people like me, how are they doing?
And that's how, I mean, in some ways, that's why we started doing this interview show right at the beginning of, COVID hitting, because I was like, let's just talk to pastors about what they're going through, and let's do it in a live environment, and let other pastors come in and join. And, we've interviewed churches of all shapes and sizes from all over the country. And it's just good to kind of, like, I think similar to the report, pastors want to know what am I going through, and what are other people going through, and just have that connection and learn from others. So,
well, as for example, when the pandemic hit, virtually every church's finances took an immediate nosedive those first couple of weeks. And they're like, oh no, if this is what's going to happen. And unfortunately, or fortunately, somebody took a survey at that very moment. And it was like, oh no, look what's happening all over the nation. Well, for most churches, that was end of March and the first week of April. Then as April went along, people figured out a rhythm. Oh yeah, we should be giving to our church, and all this. And so finances considerably picked back up for churches in April. And so people in church leadership were looking around saying, well, are we unusual in that,
Right, like what's happening right now? I don't understand what this thing is doing.
Am I all alone in that, we took the nosedive and then it started picking back up considerably? Right. And we were able to tell people, okay, here's what's happening across the country.
Right. Yeah, we obviously serve a lot of churches, and we can look at the aggregate kind of data, but even just anecdotally, like talking to pastors over the course of this thing, you even hear that same thing. So giving dipped a little, and then it kind of went up. And then as the months have gone on, it seems like it's kind of slowly coming down. Like they hit like record highs in some cases, right? And then it kind of came down, and you kind of tend to hear, oh, we're down maybe 5% to budget for the year, or things like that, where it's maybe they're down a little, but it's not as much as you might have expected. And maybe they were renting facilities, so they're saving some money there, or they were cut this program or that program, but by and large they're kind of able to work through it. So we've heard that story,
and that's exactly what I'm hearing a whole lot.
Yeah.
The net year to date is on average slightly down for churches, but they had rebudgeted and adjusted some things so that they're okay financially right now. Now everybody hurts, and that this initiative we're not able to do, but generally those churches that have had specialty kind of COVID relief funds, hey, we want to do this for our community, serve our community, this fund is going solely for that outreach, those have really gotten filled, and churches have gone gangbusters in those directions, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Very cool. What are some of the interesting findings from the report? I'm sure you've talked about it a ton. You've pored over the data, had these conversations with lots of churches. What are some of the other interesting things you picked out?
To me, the biggest surprise, we ask, how far into the future do you think the negative financial impact of the pandemic will affect your church or ministry?
Right.
And I thought, it's always good to write a question with a theory, and then you want to kind of test the theory. So I thought for sure people on that one would say more than a year. So we gave them 6-month increments out for quite a ways. And we actually said, maybe you don't think there's any impact right now. I mean, that you finished having the negative impact. Well, to my surprise, more than 3/4 of people, and you see me looking down on occasion, I'm looking at the PDF of the report.
I got my notes over here too.
Good. To my surprise, people said within a year, the negative financial impact on our ministry will be finished. Now, maybe that's that optimism theme again. And of those who said that, like a third said, actually, I think it's pretty much all done now. That the negative financial impacts, and either I'm sure I don't want to say either or. I've heard enough stories of God doing amazing things. The church I visited recently, I have always had lunch with the pastor afterwards and said, so, how are the finances doing? He said, well, we took this big step at the beginning of the year and having this big, we increased the budget because we wanted to do a certain outreach and missionary thing. And then when the pandemic hit, we thought, what should we do? And about that time, the local municipality was chewing up our street to put in a new gas line. And the company that they sub-hired came to us and said, hey, you got this big parking lot, you're probably not using it on Sundays. Can we pay you to park all our vehicles here while we work on the street? And the pastor's like, okay, thank you, Lord. You're honoring our faith. And we're going forward. And I've heard a lot of stories like that. Now, I don't want to minimize those who say, but I don't have that story. We're still hurting there. There are a lot of people hurting as well. But I don't want to take the supernatural provision out of the equation of how many churches are saying, no, actually, we are still going forward and still focused outward.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, I mean, I'm with you. It's certainly no report or study like this, but just talking to churches, talking to pastors, and hearing lots of stories of amazing things of, what God's doing and their faithfulness. Part of me thinks, even in reading through the report, I'm scanning through it and kind of looking at some of the charts and things like that. I'm like, I wonder if the optimism is just because pastors and church leaders are faithful, right? Their natural outlook on life is one of positivity, right? They're faithful people. They believe God's going to come through. And so, yeah, pastors should be optimistic about stuff like this. Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, yes, I totally agree with you, but I'm also part of different, I look at research across the whole nonprofit world, and what they call religion, which is one of generally about 10 sectors. There's the arts, and there's education and so forth.
Yep.
Medical. Religion doesn't have that much swing. You think about the person on Wall Street, who gets this big bonus at the end of the year and gives it to the symphony or whatever.
Right.
And groups like that have way ups and downs, and they are strongly affected by the stock market twists and turns. But churches have the privilege of every week being in front of their people, and every week recasting vision for God being active and putting him first in our finances. And so historically, faith groups don't have these wild gyrations.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the pieces that helps build a sense of optimism.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. My former life was at a pretty large tech company that served nonprofits, and they did annual reports on giving and all this kind of stuff. And I remember, and even, I still look at them today, but the research and on like faith-based giving or religious giving was always pretty consistent compared to other sectors. So that's interesting. There was one part in the report, you asked a question around how did cash giving perform?
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Yeah.
Tell me what you saw. Tell me.
And you've spent obviously time really thinking, but it pointed out, 66, so 60 to 66%, saw cash giving be the same or higher, right? Which is amazing. But then in my head, I go, but that's 35 to 40% that are experiencing some kind of decline. And in America, that's, call it 100,000 or so churches, right? Give or take, right? That's not an exact number, but it's a good number of churches that are, kind of on the, I don't know, neutral to decline side of cash giving. Like what's your thoughts on that? Or how did you unpack that stat a little bit?
So sensational headlines that grab the news, you can say 1 in 10 donors, are not going to give anymore because of the pandemic. Or you could say, now, wait a minute. The same research found that 9 out of 10 donors are planning to give at their current levels. I just made up that particular.
Yep, absolutely.
But you can grab the headlines with the more dramatic, and I don't ever want to underestimate the pain of that smaller group that says, yeah, but we're not experiencing optimism or a positive year to year. But those numbers, by the way, so we asked 3 months ago when we did 4 months ago when we did the first survey, we said, well, how was April 2020 to April 2019? And then we asked 3 months later, how was July 2020 to July 2019?
Right.
And the number you're referring to is those who said it was the same or better. Now, anticipating that, we are in a pandemic, that we'd have a certain percentage of people who would say, not good for me.
Right.
I didn't just say, okay, it was worse. I gave them levels. It was, up to 20% worse, or 20 to 40% worse, or more than 40% worse. And of those who said, no, it wasn't the same or better, it was down, the vast majority were in the first decline slice of the 0 to 20%. And, probably I should have narrowed that further so I could say, no, it's in the 0 to 10%.
Right. Like 0 to 5, 0 to, because I think that's, a little bit in line with what we were saying at the beginning around, like, churches saw kind of a little dip and a spike, and then it kind of has slowly come down. So they're a little under budget, but they're able to offset that in various ways and be okay. So, churches declining a little bit it's not bad news necessarily, right? So, and it's probably not, like you said, it's probably closer into that 5%, 5 or 10% versus bigger numbers. So
now, but let's also look at the giving issue. Every church tried immediately to pivot to online giving, such as Tithely,
yes.
I'm sure you've done a boom business of new people saying, yep, it is time to move to online, as have the other online people. But that is focused on regular attenders. Mm-hmm. So now the big question that churches are having in the pandemic, first you had everybody move their services to online, and there was at first this wow factor of, look at all the people coming online. And then people started to realize, oh, wait a minute, Facebook Live, counts you if you linger on the page 3 minutes. So I'm 3 seconds. So I'm scrolling down, I pause to scratch my ear, and then I keep scrolling. Oh, I got counted as a viewer.
Right,
No, I'm not an attender of your church. I was just scrolling down. So the vanity metrics have in some ways been misleading, but whatever scale you look at the metrics, they have been going down since March. The amount of people, or April, I guess, really, the amount of people going online, which raises the question, how are we reaching new people? Okay, the first start is, to invite them for those churches that aren't regathered, to watch online. But then how do we help new people take that next step of faith in discipleship, which may be, whether I'm receiving Christ today, or I'm joining the chat and just participating that way, or for some, I'd like to give some money, and the question is, how are churches doing in bringing new people in into the family, including a financial gift? And I ongoing, of course, as you know, recurring gifts are the key to the consistency for a church's online giving initiative. And I think a lot of people a lot of churches and church leaders are increasingly, as the pandemic continues, going to struggle with, how do we take these people who we've connected with by the internet and connect them for spiritual growth in every way, which may include giving.
Right. Like joining a small group, or, a prayer meeting, or giving for the first time, or any of that kind of stuff gets different in the online world. And how you get into a small group, just all this stuff is like new and different, and every church is trying to figure out how to do it well. And lots of churches are trying to figure out just how to get back to meeting in person too, because they're like, we're ready. It's time to just be back in the building.
And absolutely. But there will, for a long time, if not indefinitely, the online piece, it's going to be a church with 2 front doors, for some time going forward, if not unendingly going forward.
I mean, I hope, again, like as we've talked to churches, I hope this moment in time, however long it lasts, it prayerfully isn't going to be for years and years, but for however long it lasts, I hope it teaches churches of all shapes and sizes, right? Whether you're a 50-person church on the corner in like Texas, or you're a big mega church in Texas or California or something like that, like that every church learns how to do like digital ministry, online church better, and they come out of this going, okay, I can do church online, and I can stream my service onto YouTube or Facebook, and I know how to do a online small group and all that kind of stuff. Like, I hope churches learn this skill just by nature of having to go through it. together.
And I hope they learn an even better skill of not just rebroadcasting what's happening there in the sanctuary, but figuring out a digital delivery that suits that audience, just like they figured out how the in-person delivery matches that audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a whole nother show. Like, have you talked to any churches somewhat related to the report and all of this, but more so around talking about giving as we're going through a pandemic? So like, naturally there's going to be people that are going through hard times and financially they're impacted, they can't give. But there are other people that maybe aren't impacted as much and they still can give. But I think I've heard at times, pastors are a little bit afraid to talk about giving because of the impact it's having on people. So they maybe shy back a little bit, or they don't talk about it as often. Like, have you had any of those kind of conversations? And what would you advise a church during this time to do when it comes to like taking up the offering on the weekend?
I suspect that those that were gun shy about doing a bold, faith-filled ask in person before pandemic are largely the same ones who are hesitant about how to do it online.
Got it.
One way to approach it is just to say, hey, this is the time when we give back to God financially. Just do whatever he tells you to do. And let me pray that God would lead you clearly. If that's nothing today, we understand. And if that's you've had abundance and can bless others who are hurting right now, listen to God about that too. Let's pray. Okay.
Yeah.
So to try to take pressure off, or I've heard other churches that give their standard worshiping God by tithes and offerings. Right. And then they have kind of a caveat to say, now some of you are really hurting, and this is not about guilt. If you cannot, you cannot. But God loves the cheerful giver, and this is all about us giving with pure hearts to him today, or something that helps those that are feeling inappropriately pressured because of their own financial circumstances. To be able to navigate it. But
I think like recognizing it, right? Just kind of recognizing it, but not be afraid to talk about giving still, because there's still going to be plenty of people that can.
Yeah.
What about, again, this is back to the report, reading through it. One of the signals that you called out was churches that were growing prior to the pandemic seem to be more optimistic in general, and not that the others weren't optimistic, but there was like a correlation to like a growing church and their optimism versus a declining church and their level of optimism. Like, what were your thoughts on that?
That was the biggest spread that we found in the survey. Namely, we asked, prior to the pandemic, your finances for the last 3 years, were they growing, holding even, or declining? And then I correlated that responses to that question to how people answered the rest of the questions.
Right.
And that was the biggest differentiator in that kind of analogy to the pandemic itself, in that, they say, okay, those of you with pre-existing physical conditions, you have, a lung issue or whatever, you're more susceptible to the virus.
Right.
And as I said earlier, those are the ones that are more susceptible to struggling. But it also related to their level of optimism, predictably.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of made sense. I'm like, oh, well, they're growing, and so they're going to feel good versus not. I just, it's always fun to hear your thoughts as you've thought about it a lot, and probably talked to people about it as well. The other one that I thought was interesting, but also kind of just made sense, was churches seem to be very optimistic, but also very pragmatic. So there was optimism, and maybe giving is done okay, or it's down a little bit, but they're cutting things, and mostly in the form of like, it might be facilities, it might be programs and services that are less essential, things like that, but they're cutting those things to stay within budget. What did you learn there, or have you heard from churches around what kind of common things they're cutting to get through this time?
Frank, I'm really impressed. You flipped through this report.
Yeah, I did.
I'm like, yeah, he got it. Okay, so churches in general, about half of their budget goes to staffing cost.
Yeah.
Salaries, benefits.
Which didn't seem like they were cutting, right?
Everybody from and right. So the first fork in the road is, do we cut the staff?
Right.
And if so, how? Or do we cut the other expenses? And it seems that the vast majority trimmed in the area of other expenses. And that was insightful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I wonder what that, like for my church, right? We rent middle schools or high schools, and we have 5 locations, but that's an easy expense because we can't even meet there. So it was cut just by way of not being able to meet there. And that, I don't know exactly, but that probably made a massive difference in terms of still hitting budget, everything being kind of all good, even though giving may be down a little bit.
True. But remember, virtually everybody also had new expenses because of the pandemic. Okay, we're going to have all our workers work out of home. Okay, well, we got to give you certain work tools to do so. And we all need to buy a subscription to a different online conference.
Right. Zoom. Clearly, everyone just got Zoom and, Zoom cleaned up.
See, those who had real insight would have bought stock in Clorox and Zoom and things, and they could just tithe away and say,
That's right. So maybe kind of wrapping up a little bit here. And this is not pandemic related, but pandemic, as mentioned earlier, has accelerated this idea of online giving, mobile giving. Churches that maybe didn't want to do that or were afraid of it or just didn't really think it was a good idea were forced into doing it, right? It's like it became essential for every church on the planet. What are your thoughts around online giving and how churches should be using it these days?
Well, it did and it didn't. I heard of the churches, and these would typically be more rural churches with older congregation, older people in the congregation, and smaller churches. But there was one that when you bring your offering to the church office, honk twice, and that means 2 people will come out with the offering basket and will receive you.
That's amazing. Yes.
Pray a blessing over you, and because of the 2-person accountability, and then we'll go back in the office and put it in the safe. So then those that mailed in checks,
totally, like mailing them into the church office, definitely have heard.
Okay, and church offices have picked up, hey, we should probably as soon as someone gives, give them a stamped envelope, pre-addressed envelope for the next time they're going to do this. So all methods of giving have had creative touches and have ramped up. That said, by far more people have gone online and said, okay, we need to do this. Right. And the biggest challenge in online giving is to help people move to a consistency of doing so. There's one more small piece, and you may comment on this from Tidely. I honestly don't know. There's a certain percentage of people or churches that are hesitant because they're like, well, I don't want the fee to go, to the credit card company. Now, I understand that the net giving by giving online always way overcompensates, more than pays for whatever fee it is. But I think most online giving companies have the option of, oh no, you can give directly from your bank account to online to your church, and thus you're not giving any fee to the credit card company.
Yeah, giving from, I can't speak for everybody, but certainly it's very common that a digital giving, mobile giving kind of provider would let you give via ACH or from your bank account, as well as from credit or debit card. And we also have a cool little feature where if someone's giving, whether they're using, bank account or credit debit, they can hit the cover the fees button. So the person giving can choose like, oh, I understand you pay for a service when I go to the restaurant's paying for me to be able to use my card. They understand it happens in church. Not everybody, but some will. and there's just a little checkbox like, oh, cover the fees, so that their gift goes up a little bit, helps offset the fees for the church, and the church still getting the same kind of end result of people's giving. So, that's become increasingly, even through COVID, percentage of people giving online to their church has gone way up, and percentage of people that are covering the fees when they give has also gone way up. So, we see 40-50% of people will cover the fees when they give.
That is awesome. And the other thing you probably see that's fascinating, I've read enough studies of the online giving world to know that when people give is just all over the map. It's okay, we're sitting down, we're going to, watch the service online and we're going to give our giving, at that point. No, it's just, all throughout the week. And that gives people more options and flexibility, and ultimately is a good thing, so that whoever's praying there in the service can say, and Lord, as we receive the gifts, and for those who have already given online.
Right. Who gave on Tuesday when they were managing their finances, or when they got paid, like 1st and 15th, right? People like to kind of manage their money according to how they get paid very commonly. So giving them the ability to give around their pay periods automatically via recurring is a big benefit to churches as well.
And that's Paul's idea in 1 Corinthians about first fruits. When the harvest comes in, for us today it's a paycheck, give the first piece to God. And there can be joy in that.
100%. Well, Dr. Bird, this was awesome. I want to be respectful of your time. Super fun to just talk about the report. Where can people go to download the report?
ECFA, as in Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, .church /surveys. Now, you said earlier ECFA.org, and the same thing, ECFA.org/surveys, plural. And you will get all of our latest reports. And if you're interested, we have a church board report. What makes a church board effective? They're all free downloads. I'm having the time of my life. By the time people listen to this, a major 5-year megachurch survey released in the report will be released in late October, also at ecfa.church/surveys.
So surveys plural on both of those?
On both of those, yeah.
I'm going to put it in the chat so that people can.
So a wealth of my big discovery working for ECFA was all this knowledge stuff, not just in the research division, which I now oversee, but how do you spot for fraud in your church or ministry? Well, there's a free little pamphlet. How do you figure out, do I have enough cash reserves? And if I don't, what are the 3 best ways to build my cash reserves for my church or organization?
Amazing.
Free booklet for that. So there's just gobs of stuff there to help you do integrity well, so that Jesus is honored and the focus is on him, and not on trouble that people have gotten into.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I just posted it in the chat so people can go grab it. Super fun talking to you. We could talk about, there's all these topics even in this. So I think when you do the next round of this report, because you're doing it every
3 months,
we should get back on and just talk again and just see how it's going. Is anything changing, what we're learning? Because I think people find it really useful. So appreciate your time, and we'll do another one.
All right. You're doing a great job, Frank.
Thanks so thank you. Hey guys, if anyone's watching live right now, or for those that are watching live, make sure to show Dr. Bird some love. Give the show a like. Go over to ecfa.church/surveys and download the report. And we will catch you guys next week. Thanks, everybody.